Aloha, and we'll continue on with part two. And again, going back to the idea of political myths and looking at those so called mythologies that play a very important role in shaping the way we think and how we look at so called history. So, continuing on the question of so called who built the pyramids. And again, remembering why this is such a pertinent and important question, in that the pyramids represent the highest level, really, of ingenuity, mathematics, and the sciences, physical sciences, and so forth. And so the question, of course, who builds the pyramids becomes one which really answers the questions of who, in fact, may have had the highest form of civilizations, mathematics and science. And so, looking at this video here, of course, we can see which is the question you have to ask is why is it something that's not more understood? Or why is it something that's, in a sense, hidden? To really understand that, yes, the so called pyramids are in Northeast Africa, in ancient land of Kemet, later called by the Greeks Egypt. And yeah, and so as you can even see in the images portrayed here, that the evidence is overwhelming that the people of North Africa that are associated with the pyramids, all the art, the religion, the ancient people of Kemet were in fact indeed what you would tip of being an African person, um, and so as we continue on, again, more and more images, and you can see, I mean, look at the so-called afro, the eyes. I mean, you can really see the very dark features of those who are part of the land of Kemet. But it's also to recognize that they come in many different shades, as you can see depicted in the actual artwork there, um, and who involved with, in fact, not just the construction, but even the so-called pharaohs, those who were in charge, and the religious leaders of the politics and religion of that ancient civilization. And yes, as you can see in the map here, where is Egypt? It is in Northeast Africa. Yeah, this is the African continent. It is no doubt, in fact, that Egypt is in so-called Africa. As you can see, it's actually bordered by Sudan, yeah, Ethiopia down to the south of it. You have Chad, Niger, Libya, all surrounding the land of Kemet. And yes, the Great Pyramids are in Egypt. And what's interesting is that as you go down south, the Nile, in fact, the river Nile, right, Nile, is one of the longest rivers in the world that goes from the south, goes north. Yeah, so when people say Upper Nile, what they mean is Southern Nile in this area. And you can see all the way down into the lands of the Nubians, and again, so this is called Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. Now, what's interesting is as you go down south, as you go up into Upper Egypt, the dates of the archaeology, the historic sites, the religious sites that you find there are older. So there's no doubt that older sites are down in the south and work their way up north, downriver. So in other words, downriver, yeah, which is actually heading up north. So who the Nile River? What's important about the Nile River? Well, if you remember going all the way back to the question of um, the story of Moses, right? We know in the story of Moses, the mythology, of course, is Moses, in fact, is found in the Nile. Moses being what becomes the patriarch of Judaism, and from that, later is born the religions of Christianity and both Muslim. In other words, the foundation of those so-called religions themselves come from the Nile, come from these lands. In other words, are African. Yeah, and you can see, again, look at this map here. The Nile starts up in places like Uganda, through Ethiopia, Sudan, and then later up to Egypt. The land of Kemet, again, the ancient land, which actually means the black land. And again, it's no doubt looking at the images that you find there that these are, in fact, are people of dark color. The question we should ask is, why should it matter? Why, and people say, oh, it doesn't matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, then why not? Shouldn't the truth matter? That's the bottom line. Yes, the truth matters, not the color, but the truth. And we do know historically, according to the traditions, the first name that's associated with the Great Pyramid of Giza, in fact, is the name Khufu, one of the ancient pharaohs. It was the tallest structure in the world for over 4,000 years. And this is an image of Khufu right here on the right. So, um, it's not like it's a secret. You can see his actual features of his face. Again, why the controversy? Why this idea they have to reject the idea of darkness, and that's again goes into this racist philosophy that everything comes out of Europe. Well, let's be clear. While these pyramids were being built, why the high level of civilization was going on in places like Kemet or Egypt, that we call it today. I mean, Europe, basically was a land of really those who had no sense of, as said, they had no shoes, no houses. That these were people that, when it come into world history, were far behind, in fact, in comparison to what was going on in places like Africa. Again, more images just to pay attention. As you can see, these are Nubians paying tribute to Ramses, and you can see from the images of their faces. Yeah, this is what we're talking. These are the people of those lands. And again, more Nubian images of Egypt. Again, not just kind of dark, but many, many dark people involved with those lands. Now, going back to the story of the biblical story through Moses, I had I've had several um, interactions with those who found offensive for whatever reason that I was calling Moses African, but Moses is African. That's a fact. The mythology, in fact, somehow he isn't. And if you have any doubt, like I said, you can even look at the Bible itself. And if you look at Genesis 2, they talk about the first, well, what's the first land that's mentioned in the Bible? In fact, the first land that's mentioned is in Africa. Yeah, the land of the Kush, or the Kush people, sometimes spelled with a C, sometimes with a K. Yeah, and the Cush, in fact, if you might be one, I wonder where Cush or Cushites are. Well, Moses himself, Moses' wife is Cushite. Of course, we know Moses in the story in the mythology, right? He's raised in the household of the Pharaoh in Egypt. Where does his wife come from? Well, the land of Cush. Where's Cush? This is Cush here. Yeah, so this is lands that, in fact, are south of Egypt. Yeah, the Nubian people towards Sudan and even into Ethiopia. In fact, many times we talk about Kush, they kind of reference to what today you would call the lands of Ethiopia. Again, a very African place. We can look at some of the greatest creations, like the Sphinx, one of the oldest creations, one of the highly showcasing the high mathematics and civilization, and also an archaeoastronomical symbol, yeah, a religious symbol. And as you can see, the body of a lion, and today it has a face of a so-called man. You notice that the nose is gone, and as the mythology, another mythology goes, is that when the French, through Napoleon, when they in the early 1800s took control of Egypt in war, um, when they invaded those lands, as the story goes, the mythology is they looked up and they saw the noses, and you'll notice the noses across many of the so-called images and statues were defaced and simply blown off. And the story is, why would they blow off the nose? Well, the nose had a very strong so-called African nose. And although they said that the head of the Sphinx, some many believe is not the original. Some believe it was a dog, some believe it was actually a lion, a head connected to Taurus or Leo. Sorry, Taurus is the bull, yeah, Leo being the lion. But anyway, even the mythology of how come the noses gets, but they were so shocked. They could not believe that it was Africans. Again, why would white people develop an image of someone with an African nose? It doesn't make sense. And it goes along with the mythology why so-called white Europeans would destroy and deface the nose in recognition that, in fact, yes, it was dark Africans that created all of this, the highest level of civilization. And pyramids, when we look at the debate over pyramids, well, you can find pyramids throughout Africa. Yeah, in fact, you find it all over the world today, as they find, in fact, connected to who? Yeah, dark peoples of the world. You have more pyramids in Sudan than you would find in what today we call Egypt. You can find sphinxes and lion images and bull images and goat images and Aries image, all these ancient archaeoastronomical, astrological, I should say, images, and again, you can see it. You find it throughout the land. Now, how many pyramids do you find in Europe? How many images of sphinxes do you find in Europe? Probably not. But the point is, it is an African, and it's an African creation. Yeah. And like I just said, yeah, again, look at these sphinxes. I mean, you can see it up and down in the lands of Africa. So it's no doubt that the Sphinx was created by Africans along with the pyramids. Yeah, even into the so-called Valley of the Kings. We can look at Luxor, yeah, which is again down south from the pyramids, and you can see what I call the obelisks. Yeah, these are the erected statues, and you can see people say, "Hey, the George Washington Monument, right?" It's not just George Washington. There's something. It's a legacy that was taken from Africa, imported even into the Americas. Yeah, why? Again, this kind of hope to claim the glory of so-called Kemet. Now, what does these symbolize? Well, you can tell it's a phallic symbol, resurrection, yeah, the erection, resurrection, yeah, part of the whole story and connected to Isis. And you find this again all through Africa. Well, of course, we should recognize this is the George Washington Monument, even in the United States, have taken this symbolism. But if you think about this, I want to, if you know, had more time, you'd recognize, yes, this is in fact is a phallic symbol. Yeah, the resurrection. Yeah. In fact, it's the same that you find on the steeples of churches. You need to go and do some research there. But anyways, you can see even in Washington D.C., they borrowed these images, just like Las Vegas. But if this is a male phallic symbol, well, what is this here? And then, of course, you start to see what's called vesica Pisces, or the symbol of the female. Yeah, so literally, you have the male sexual symbol and the female sexual symbol, and yeah, they're joined together right in Washington, D.C. And again, don't believe anything I say. You should look for yourself and find out. Now, what's also interesting, I don't have time to go through all of these. When you look at things like the pyramids, you realize the high level of the mathematics and the astronomy and also astrology that are connected, and the sciences, and the angles, and the equator, and anyway, what you see within the pyramid, not to go through the mathematics, is that it represents to really showcase that they knew exactly the size of the so-called Earth. They knew exactly back then much of the geography connected to what becomes the Earth, especially in regards to the mathematics. Yeah. And again, you can see this throughout the pyramid. Why is the pyramid in that shape? As you can see in its relation to, if you study important angles and things like pi and phi, and you find that all in with the symbol. So, in other words, the pyramid wasn't just built; it is really a symbol of mathematics at the highest level, and geometry, and so forth. Yeah. Even into the symbology of mathematics. Some of you are familiar with the Eye of Horus, which has more time to kind of go through all of this. But people don't realize that it's, again, as you can see, it's all mathematical, and this is partly because much of the deep culture of the so-called Egyptians, in their religious ideas, again, were very much tied to mathematics and science. It's very science and mathematic based, yeah, not based upon mythologies. And its connection to things like the pineal gland, the God's eye. As you can see, the word pineal, pine, and you can go and look it up yourself. You can find these same kind of images, whether it's in the Vatican, yeah, the Catholic Church. Why does the Catholic Church have these ancient symbols? Again, because it all comes from Africa. The eye, the top of the pyramid, again, the back of our dollar bill, and so forth. Yeah, these are all the mind's eye, the God's eye. But again, that kind of spirituality goes all the way back to Africa. Again, just more of the same. Yeah. Today, people talk about Fibonacci code. You talk about the mathematics of life. But the point is that this was all understood by the ancient Africans. Here at the top left, you have that image famously done by Da Vinci, that human image. But if you really understood what the image represents, it's mathematics in a sense. It's showing this, uh, as you can see, this symbol here, this idea of eternity. It's a constant, just continues to move. And what you find, that flow is a natural flow in nature, a natural form of power, a particular ratio. That is in, again, things like the pyramid, things that already had been understood thousands of years ago. Yeah, again, as you can see, you see the same kind of angles like the pyramid within. And so a lot of times people just attribute it to the sense of godliness and divine. There's a certain divine code. And I also mentioned about the female code, and I don't have time to go through all of this stuff, but just to show you, these ancient symbols are nothing new. They're kind of reinterpreted, but they go all the way back to ancient Africa. Even some of the earliest so-called gods or goddesses, Nut, in fact, is said to be the earliest goddess, yeah, in Africa, in fact, represented by the Milky Way, as you can see that's portrayed in this artwork. Ancient Kemet, again, just to show you how ancient the land of Kemet is. And yes, it's not a secret. It's not like they did not, it's a secret to figure out. I wonder what they look like. There are more than enough images and statues and paintings, as you can see here. It's very clear, what they so-called look like. Yeah, so it's not even a guess wandering. Yeah, it's a matter of science. Again, this is Menes, King Menes, from the 31st century BCE, said to be the first. But again, you can see these images here. We can see who they are. We can see even the first, what's called the 42 Laws of Ma'at, yeah, which sometimes referred to as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which really becomes the cornerstone of what later on becomes even religions like Judaism. You see the direct connection. And don't forget, Moses himself comes out of so-called training to be a religious leader, as a so-called priest, yeah, under the Egyptian system. Yeah, and so you can find all the so-called 10 commandments. You can find 32 more, what's called the 42 negative confession. Even the idea of being judged, as you can see, your heart being weighted. And then after that, you're going to be judged for being a good or bad person. Yeah, again, these are ancient symbols, nothing new. Akhenaten, yeah, Amenhotep, one of the early pharaohs of Egypt, also, as you can see the image here. You can also see even the connection to the sun. In fact, the word Amenhotep, Amen, that's the same Amen used in prayer. And it's interesting that many, Christian religious people today even don't even know their own history. And I say, yeah, whenever you say the word Amen, it actually goes back to ancient Egypt, to Africa. That's the point. It's an African word. It's actually a name of an African pharaoh, Amenhotep. So whenever you say Amen, you're recognizing Amenhotep. Like I said, don't believe anything I say. These are things you should know for yourself. But why does it matter? Because again, it should matter. Yeah. What is based on fact? What is based on mythology? These are the kinds of things we should have critical thinking to figure out. And we can look at the history, yeah, from especially in ancient times, but look at the images, how it's portrayed in European images of Joseph. Look at his paintings, and this is done, I think, in the 16, 1700s. This particular painting, sorry, maybe 1700s. But again, you can look at all these other images, and you can see very, very different kind of images are being portrayed here. Yeah. And the question you should always ask is why. Again, even King so-called Tut, that is his image. There's always this kind of question of, is that the real King Tut? And then, they kind of make up all, but you can find, again, the question is, why is this denial of what's already there, evidence? Yeah. And that's because, make a clear answer, wrong color. Yeah. And I mean, you can see overwhelmingly, this is Seti. So if you remember in the story of Moses, this is the uncle. He was the so-called pharaoh that Moses was living under. Yeah, and you can see this is his image here, and you can see pretty brown. Ramses, in fact, who's raised with Moses as if his brother, and he's actually his, it's kind of like his cousin because he's actually found by the sister of the pharaoh. But yeah, this is Ramses himself, yeah, played by Hugh Brin in the movie. Interesting character. We have Hezekiah. So you see the very top left of this image. You can see it's very portrayed in this painting as being very European, very white, so-called looking. But when you look at the story of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah plays a huge role, especially for the so-called Israelites. Um, but you can when they found his coinage, yeah, what they call bullahs, yeah, bullahs. It's like when you find a quarter, right? On one side you get heads and tails, and you get the images imprinted. Well, they found Hezekiah's image, and he's a very high level ranking Israelite king. But when they look at his coinage, they were kind of shocked because it says new Bula reveal Egyptian style emblems. And what they found on his coinage, when it was in fact African symbols again. I mean, so the question is, why would Hezekiah, if he's looking like this, why would he have African symbols? Well, perhaps is that Hezekiah was African and did not even look this way at all. Again, this is an interpretation of painting, and this is why. Yeah, the Judaism himself comes out of Africa. Again, this is not a secret. Yeah, these are images that you can find. Again, I ask you to go and look for yourselves, and you can see in the back here, the bulla. You can see that image of that flying, the flying so-called sun, the serab, yeah, the beetle with the wings. Yeah, and the same image that you find even in arm money in the United States to this day. Yeah. And here's another image of the bulla. Yeah, they quite essentially Egyptians. Again, when you see Egyptian, always think African, right? There's this need for those empowerment tends to hide that particular study. Ask the question why? Who benefits? Who's disempowered? Even the image of Cleopatra we have in the middle, that's the Hollywood version of Cleopatra. And but yes, we have images of Cleopatra, and you can see in the Hollywood version, she has braided hair, but in real life, she had what today you would call dreadlocks, and you can see Cleopatra here. Now, interesting, Cleopatra's time. Cleopatra in so-called Egypt of that time, Egypt had already been invaded many times. They had been taken over by the Sumerians who came down like 500 BC. Yeah. And then, no, sorry, Assyrians, 500 BC. And then later, the Greeks, and then later, finally, the Romans all had taken part in controlling Egypt at this time. So when Cleopatra comes to power, she's kind of as they would say, she's Hapa by this point. Yeah, she already had been the so-called African pharaohs by that point had become, had intermarried with different peoples from that area. And so she was considered, I guess today you would call her a Hapa person, a mixed physical person. Yeah. Now, what's interesting for us guys to think about is that we of today, right now in 2025, yeah, January 2025, are closer in time. We today are closer in time to Cleopatra than, in comparison, Cleopatra was to the time when in ancient, uh, what we call Egypt today, the pyramids were built. In other words, we are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to the construction of the pyramids. This is how ancient so-called Egypt is. Yeah, so when we think about Cleopatra, she comes way at the end of the so-called Egyptian, um, during the various Egyptian empires that had existed. Yeah. So when we think about Egypt, in other words, we really shouldn't be thinking about an Egypt that a Cleopatra Egypt. And we need to think of thousands of years before that to really get a better idea of what Egypt was and what it was like. And just to add to the politics of today, just to kind of clearly, I always say, it's kind of when you look at places like Gaza today, Gaza being, under attack by the Israelis um, in the genocide campaign of Gaza, people don't realize how close Gaza is as close to so-called Egypt as any land. There is, and so if you want to use Egypt as the line that says, aha, this is the end of Africa, kind of arbitrary line, yeah, that Egypt is the, like somehow in the natural, you know, then if you want to argue that Gaza is outside of Africa, you can, but it's you cannot get any closer. Put it, Gaza is then now attached to what we would today call Africa, Egypt. Yeah. And in fact, as you can see, I have a little, demonstration below. You can see Gaza to Cairo. And again, Cairo is not even on the edge. Cairo is where you have the pyramids. From Gaza to the pyramids now. Think about this. Yeah. Is about the same distance. Gaza to the pyramids are about the same distance as Honolulu is to Hilo. Yeah. So in other words, we're not talking a far distance. You're talking relatively close. So to think somehow that the people of ancient Gaza were not African, I mean, it's really kind of, uh, I mean, it'll be almost, I mean, it's hard to imagine. Yeah, you hard to imagine. And let's be clear, we also know historically the Kemet including Ethiopians and other African nations. The Nubians had all conquered up way up into Canaan many hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. Yeah, in fact, I should say thousands of years ago. We know that for sure. Yeah. But we also should realize that even when we talk about ancient Canaan, when people talk about the original people of the land, and people don't realize that yes, they were African people. Look up the so-called Natufians. As you can see, Natufians, as just as the map can show you, from northern Africa, again into what today we call Canaan. But again, back as far as 15,000 years ago, you can see, and you can see the Natufians. They were very dark people. So the most ancient people of those lands were dark, so-called African people, from time immemorial. Yeah. And what do you find in those kind of places? Well, here's the biblical story of the tree of life. Yeah, the Adam and Eve story, the tree of life, and the so-called serpent that manages somehow to convince Eve to eat the so-called fruit or the apple. Well, just to show you, this is not an original story. You can find even in the African pyramids, thousands of years before the so-called Holy Bible was ever created. The story had already been imprinted, even in the archaeology, the artwork, in fact, in so-called Africa. This is African. So, in other words, even the Adam and Eve story is so-called African. Yeah, again, but we shouldn't be surprised. Yeah, we should realize that there's a lot of so-called scholarship that has already been done, and even to the heartland of what becomes the creation of classical Europeans, right? So a lot of times Europe will look at Greece and talk about Greece as being really the foundation of what becomes European, um, classical European philosophy, mathematics, and so forth. Now, as many others have already showed, and I don't have to go through all this, is that, again, look at this title here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Africans wrote, but that, a lot of these ancient stories and histories are African, period. Again, this is not Kalikua making this. I'm showing you guys these are actual scholarly books that you can find out there. So it's not about being mad. As I said, don't get mad at the messenger, right? You should figure out what the message is. Why is it an issue? This is the point. Why would it be an issue? Why should it be an issue? You see, what has been poisoned our mind? Yeah. But even again, the Greeks. Now, when people talk about the Greeks started this and started that, well, all you gotta look is go look at a map. Go look at Greece. Where is Greece situated? Here's the Mediterranean. Here's Greece. Here's the Mediterranean. Here's North Africa, Egypt. You cannot get, it's as close as you can get. Right across North Africa, right across Mediterranean is Greece. Not just there, but we do know you can look at the ancient artwork in Greece, and what do you think you find there? Yeah, as it has here, Afro-Asiatic roots. Again, the question should be not who, because it's already understood when you look at the facts, who are the who do the so-called Greeks come from? Where did they get their knowledge from? It's clearly African. That shouldn't be the question. The question should be, why is there such a fear? Why is there such a reluctance to accept what is clear in regards to history? What is, again, mythology versus history, right? So mythology, you like to start with Greece, not realizing, well, where do you think the Greece got it? Well, if you look at the history of the Greece themselves, they'll tell you. We can actually look at the great artwork even in modern times. Yeah, here's his Leonardo da Vinci's artwork. Yeah, where he portrays the so-called Last Supper, and here's, it's said to be Jesus in the middle here. Now, if you take a good look at these images here, you clearly see, oh, they look very European. They dress like Europeans, look like they're going to eat like Europeans. Well, we must also remember that Da Vinci did not paint this in the so-called Holy Lands where Jesus walked. This was painted um, in Europe, and this, in fact, uh, and the thing you need to recognize, almost 1,500 years. I repeat, 1,500 years after this so-called person was said to have walked the earth. Yeah. Now, so it's pretty clear that this is not an original. That's the point. One of the issues that people will see this image and they get caught up in somehow thinking if it's a Kodak moment, it's a real image. This was an interpretation 1,500 years after the fact. You want to go look an earlier? How about this one? This is 14. And this one, I believe, this was painted in the I believe it's the third century, 200 something AD. But